Welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is pretty specific.
Right.
We're taking the sources you sent, and we're pulling out those key everyday English bits.
Right. Things like rhythmic phrases, essential phrasal verbs.
Exactly. The stuff that will, well, hopefully instantly make your English sound more natural, more conversational.
Yeah, fluent. And we're really zeroing in on the tricky parts, aren't we? The nuances.
Totally. Like, you might know the dictionary definition of a word.
Like cancel, for instance. You know what it means.
Right. But maybe you don't quite get why a native speaker often defaults to something like call off instead.
Mm-hmm. And that difference, that's really what this deep dive is about. It's not just definitions.
No, it's the flow, the context,
Yeah.
how these things actually sound in daily speech.
Exactly. The rhythm.
That context is so important. Oh, and before we jump in, maybe we should quickly define one term we'll be using a lot.
Good idea. Phrasal verbs.
Yeah, phrasal verbs.
Sure. So a phrasal verb is basically a verb combined with another small word, usually a preposition or an adverb.
Like call plus off, or bring plus up.
Precisely. And the key thing is, this combination usually creates a whole new meaning, often totally different from the original verb on its own.
Which gives spoken English so much of its, well, its character. And maybe complexity, too.
Definitely complexity.
Yeah.
But also dynamism.
Okay, so let's look at the four main things we've pulled out for you today. We've sort of split it into two bits.
Sounds good.
First, we'll tackle those time expressions, the ones that add a bit more detail and rhythm.
Okay.
And then we'll get into two really useful, versatile phrasal verbs.
Right. Let's start with time, setting the scene.
Perfect. So the first phrase to really get comfortable with is the day before yesterday.
Ah, yes. A classic.
Now, on paper, it just means 2 days ago, right?
Mhm.
If today's Thursday, then the day before yesterday was Tuesday. Simple math.
Simple math, yes.
But I notice a lot of learners tend to stick with 2 days ago. And sometimes, well, it can make their stories sound a little bit, I don't know, stiff.
It really can. The difference isn't about being right or wrong mathematically. It's about cadence, rhythm.
Cadence.
2 days ago, it's
Yeah.
fine. It's functional,
Yeah.
accurate, almost like data entry.
Okay, transactional.
Exactly. Transactional. But when you're telling a story or just mapping out a sequence of events, the day before yesterday, it just flows better. It sounds more natural, more descriptive.
It sort of signals you're about to tell a little story, doesn't it?
It does. It sets a scene.
I find myself doing that too, actually. If I'm tired or rushing, I'll just say 2 days ago. But if I take a breath,
And use the full phrase.
yeah, the day before yesterday, it feels like the listener leans in a bit more.
Yeah.
Why is that, do you think? Just the rhythm.
Well, the rhythm is part of it, but it's also about emphasis, I think. The words themselves, day before yesterday, they kind of spread the stress out. It makes you pace yourself a little more.
Ah, interesting.
Think about the examples, right? I met her 2 days ago. Okay, fact. Versus, I met her the day before yesterday. It sounds a bit more, I don't know, inviting. Like there's more to the story.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
And it also links things to today more clearly, maybe. Like, I started feeling sick the day before yesterday, and today I feel worse.
Exactly. That instantly connects those 3 points.
Yeah.
When it started, the day after, and now. 2 days ago is fine, but the day before yesterday creates that little narrative arc straight away.
Right. It highlights the contrast between then and now.
Precisely. It's a small thing, but it enhances the narrative. So a tip for you listening, next time you're talking about something that happened 2 days ago, try consciously swapping it. See how it feels.
Good tip. Okay, moving from a specific point in the past to how often something happens, frequency.
Right. Routines, habits.
This brings us to structures like once a year, once a month, once a week.
Foundational stuff for daily conversation. Once just means one time, obviously.
Once a year is 1 time per year.
Yep. And just quickly, the counting goes. Once for 1 time, twice for 2 times.
And then 3 times, 4 times, and so on.
Right. But the interesting thing here conversationally is choosing between, say, once a week and every week.
Ah, yes. I hear learners sometimes stumble on this. They seem so similar. Is I go to the gym once a week. Really different from I go to the gym every week.
Grammatically, not really. They're interchangeable in terms of basic meaning. But there's a subtle difference in emphasis.
Okay.
Every week sort of implies this continuous, unbroken pattern. Like it happens week in, week out.
Right, the routine itself.
Yeah. Whereas once a week kind of isolates that single occurrence within the time frame. It puts the focus more on the event happening one time during that cycle.
So like the example, We visit my grandparents once a year.
Exactly. That feels a bit more specific, maybe more intentional than saying we visit my grandparents every year. Every year could just mean, it happens annually, maybe around a holiday, but once a year highlights that single visit.
Okay, that makes sense. Once it focuses on the frequency count, every focuses on the consistent pattern.
You got it. And that distinction, that subtle shift in focus based on phrasing.
Leads us right into phrasal verbs.
Perfectly. Because choosing the right phrasal verb, just like the time expression, can totally change the feel of what you're saying.
Okay, let's switch gears then. Phrasal verbs. Absolutely essential for sounding fluent. First up, bring up.
A very common one, and potentially confusing because it has two main, quite distinct meanings.
Right. The first one, probably the most common in work or social chats, is simply mentioning something, introducing a topic.
That's right. To mention or introduce a topic into the conversation.
Hang on, why use bring up when you could just say mention? Is bring up more casual?
Not always more casual, no, but it often feels more active, more deliberate.
Active.
Yeah. Bring up often suggests you're intentionally introducing something that maybe wasn't being discussed or perhaps is a bit sensitive or important. There's a sense of effort.
Ah, okay. So mentioning the weather is passive, maybe.
Right. But if you bring up the budget problems in a meeting...
That's a definite action. You're putting it on the table.
Exactly. Carries a bit more weight than just a casual mention.
That's a useful distinction. So giving advice, like, look, maybe don't bring up politics at dinner. You mean don't start that potentially awkward conversation.
Precisely. Don't introduce it. And that contrast becomes even clearer with the second meaning.
Which is completely different.
Totally unrelated. To bring someone up.
Meaning to raise a child, to care for them, teach them as they grow up.
Yep. They're literally brought up towards adulthood.
So that's where the confusion can happen for learners, right?
Absolutely. Because she brought up an interesting point, meaning she mentioned it.
Okay.
But then you have, they were brought up in London, meaning they were raised there, grew up there.
The context tells you everything.
It has to. You really need to look at what follows the verb, the object. If it's an idea, a topic, a question, it's about mentioning.
And if it's a person, a child,
then it's almost certainly about their upbringing, their childhood.
Got it. I remember trying to use it in a presentation once, talking about, like, bringing up a new performance metric.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and I kind of realized afterwards I might have sounded like I was talking about raising a toddler metric. A bit awkward.
Haha. Yeah, context is vital with phrasal verbs. It really highlights that precision needed.
It certainly does. Okay, which leads us smoothly to our final phrasal verb for today, another really common one. Call off. Ah, call off. Yes, very useful.
This one seems more straightforward in meaning. It just means to cancel something, right? An event, a plan, a meeting.
That's exactly it, to cancel. And honestly, you need this one for conversational fluency, while cancel is perfectly correct.
Call off is what people often actually say.
It really is. It's kind of the default in everyday speech. You hear it all the time. They called off the concert because of the rain.
Or the meeting was called off at the last minute.
Even for big things. She called off the wedding. That's extremely common. You said it's the default. Is there a difference in tone? Does call off sound, I don't know, softer or less blunt than just cancel?
Maybe slightly. It's mostly just conversational habit, I think. But you could argue that because it's two words, it sort of diffuses the action slightly.
Right.
Cancel is quite sharp, one syllable. Call off spreads it out a tiny bit.
Okay.
But the really interesting thing about call off, technically speaking, is its separability.
Ah, separable phrasal verbs. Okay, this is key for sounding natural.
It really is. So call off is separable, which means you can keep the verb and the particle together. They called off the concert.
Right, verb, particle, object.
Or you can separate them and put the object in the middle. They called the concert off.
Okay. And that second way often sounds a bit more natural, doesn't it? They call the concert off.
It often does, yeah, especially if the object is a bit longer. But here's the crucial rule, the non-negotiable bit for fluency.
Okay.
If you replace the object noun, the concert, the meeting, with a pronoun, like it or them, you must separate the phrasal verb. The pronoun has to go in the middle.
Ah, so you cannot say, we called off it.
Never. No native speaker would say that.
You have to say, we decided to call it off.
Exactly. Call it off. That little detail, placing the pronoun correctly, is a huge signal of fluency. Mastering call it off is, well, it's a big step up.
Wow. Okay. That's a really practical point.
It makes a real difference.
All right, let's do a super quick recap then. 4 key building blocks we've covered today.
Let's do it.
First, the day before yesterday. Use it for that narrative rhythm instead of just 2 days ago.
Right. Second, the once a year, month, week structure for frequency. Remember that subtle difference in emphasis compared to every.
Third, bring up. Remember the two meanings mentioning a topic versus raising a child, and context is your guide.
Yep. And finally, call off, meaning to cancel. Super common. And remember that crucial rule about pronouns.
You say call it off. Put the pronoun in the middle.
Exactly. Call it off.
These aren't rare words. You hear them constantly. They're the glue
Yeah.
in everyday conversations.
Absolutely. So for you listening, the best way to make these stick is, well, use them. Like right now.
Don't just passively listen. Try it out.
Yeah, build your own sentences. Tell someone what you did the day before yesterday. Mention how often you do something using once a.
Maybe think about something that got canceled recently and say they had to call it off.
Exactly. Consciously use them. And listen for them. Pay attention when you're watching a show or listening to the news. You'll hear call off and bring up all the time.
Learning these little rhythmic phrases and phrasal verbs is not just about adding words.
No, it fundamentally changes how quickly people understand you. It makes your English flow better, sound more natural immediately.
That's our deep dive for today. Thanks so much for joining us, and keep going on your fluency journey.
Yeah, keep practicing. And actually, here's something to think about before we finish. How often do you already use phrasal verbs, but maybe only when you feel really confident? Like replacing a simple verb like cancel with call off. Pay attention to that over the next few days. When do you naturally use these two-word verbs versus the simpler ones? That gap, that's kind of what we're trying to help you cross.